In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a daylight movement using habitat improvements like food plots and bedding areas, and how you can have a mature buck in the daylight come by your stand this season. So if you have deer on your property during the daylight, that's really good. And to keep that up, and you do not want deer on your property during the night because you're never going to see them, you're never going to have a chance at shooting that mature buck or that once-in-a-lifetime buck that you're after. And so how to create a daylight movement property is easier than you think if you do the right things. A lot of people are led astray by a lot of stuff that they've seen, a lot of stuff that they watch, and a lot of deer are not nocturnal. You have to personally make them nocturnal if you want them. If you have to do something to make them nocturnal. Deer are not just nocturnal. You have to personally make them nocturnal. So before we get into how to create a daylight movement property, I'm going to first talk about the first point, nocturnal myths. And I've done a video on this before, and I'll probably put one out soon. But we got to kind of go through this point first before we can understand the rest of how to create daylight movement. So number one nocturnal myth is you have to personally make a buck nocturnal, whether that be bad access, bad habitat improvements in wrong spots. Deer, and especially mature bucks, are not nocturnal unless you make them. Like I've said before, you don't put a stand right in the middle of a food plot and go right through the middle of the food plot to access it where you're expecting that mature buck to be. A lot of hunters that I personally know, are doing wrong access, and that's blowing out their entire hunt for the season. It's because they're not accessing right. They're spooking out deer before they even get to your stands, and that's a whole nother level of hunting mistakes. But nocturnal bucks in general, you're not going to have a chance at a buck if you're accessing wrong, putting tree stands in the wrong spots, hunting food plots in the morning, hunting fields in the morning, stuff like that. So nocturnal deer are what you make them. You make your deer herd nocturnal. Your deer herd is not just naturally nocturnal. So mature bucks, I have tons of pictures of bucks coming in the dark, and that's fine. But I've seen a bunch of bucks, and 75% of my pictures from last season were mature bucks in the daytime or in shooting hours. So you want to have those deer in shooting hours. And so nocturnal bucks, you make them nocturnal. Like I've said, you go into your stands wrong, all of that comes into play. Now during the rut, you have a slighter chance at getting them, but they're not just like the October lull. That's another myth, and you can go on and on. I could go on and on about nocturnal myths, but your property is not just nocturnal unless you do these things and you hunt it right. So number two, kind of falling into that, is pressure. If you have pressure on your land, you're pressuring the deer. Like I said, by pressuring the deer, you're making them nocturnal at the same time. If you're allowed getting into stands, allowed accessing, allowed doing all of those things, going right through the middle where they can see you, hear you, and smell you. Those are the three main things you need to think about when you're setting up tree stands, setting up access routes to get to your tree stands. Can a deer see me when I'm accessing and in the tree? Can a deer smell me? Is my wind right? And can a deer hear me? Am I being quiet? So those are the three main things that pressure deer the most. And even riding ATVs out around your property during deer season will also spook those deer off for about a week or two. And so food plots late season. If you're hunting food plots and you've been hunting them through October through November, then you are going to pressure those food plots, and those food plots are not going to be good at all during the late season. And that's when deer need them the most. Mature buck loses 25% of its body fat when it's during the rut. because it's chasing does and doing all of that. So they need to regain that food and that fat before winter comes, especially up north. If you're in a harsh winter, you're in harsh winter regions, they have to eat a lot before they can withstand that cold that's coming. Just like fawns too. Fawns need that good quality food that's unpressured, where they feel safe getting in there, so that way they can survive through the winter, if they do at all. So making sure you're not pressuring your food plots is critical during the late season, and just for your hunt in general. Your deer herd and your hunt are going to be horrible if you've pressured that food plot. So now, after we've gone through those 2 points, how to create a daylight movement parcel. And so I kind of put food plots as a point under pressure, but food plots are a great one too. Putting food plots in the right spot, choosing the right seed. Most seeds don't really matter what you choose, as long as it's good for your deer herd. And so food plots are really good. Unpressured food plots are even better if you're not hunting them. If you have a hunting plot, destination plot. Here I have a hunting plot, and mainly the ag fields around me are destination plots, because here in Illinois, with a lot of flat land, not much cover, those ag fields act as destination plots. So we use those as destination plots. But food plots, if you're hunting them the right way, kind of hunting off to the side, in most cases, hunting off to the side of a food plot, not directly on the food plot, is better, because you're not spooking out those deer when you're exiting your tree stand. So it's all about access and tree stands, where you're putting them mainly. And so number 3 is bedding areas. And so putting those bedding areas in, I've done the switchgrass bedding area. I've planted some switchgrass just 2 weeks ago about, and I planted a lot of trees. I planted 91 trees so far. So I'm excited to see how those grow, and hopefully they provide a lot of cover. And if you ever need any habitat trees, go to Coldstream Farms. They sell really good habitat trees for doing bedding areas and food plot screenings as well. So I did both of those. I did bedding areas and food plot screenings with the trees. But bedding areas in general, unpressured bedding areas, especially those thermal cover bedding areas, especially during the winter when they need those thermal bedding areas the most, those are crucial to when deer need them the most, especially in the late season. Food and unpressured bedding areas will make you have a daylight movement parcel property. And so bedding areas in general are really good for your hunting ground, making sure that they're unpressured, and if you just hunting them the right way. And number 4 is mock scrapes and water holes. And so I've got a couple pictures of the water hole that I put out, and so I'm excited to get that in the ground fully. The hole that I dug, it rained the next day and was still already kind of raining. I just wanted to get it dug, and then I'll come in probably next week sometime when the water's all drained out, and I'll put that water hole in, and hopefully it'll start filling up with water. So excited to get that in the ground. But mock scrapes and water holes, they're not necessarily going to attract a mature buck to your land. They're going to define where the mature buck goes. So instead of going off to the side to go to a food plot, if you're in the middle of the woods and you want to make sure that a buck comes right next to you and within shooting range, put a mock scrape up, just a 5-foot licking branch about waist high, and then put a water hole off to the side about 6 or 7 feet, and then that will be a really good definition for defining where the deer, and especially the mature bucks, are moving at in big woods regions. So those are really good defining the movement. So instead, if you can't, say there's a bunch of thick cover where the deer move, you can't necessarily get a stand in there, can't hunt it, then put that mock scrape or water hole to the outside of that where you can put a stand, and they'll come travel through there. And I've seen it work. I had a number of bucks lick the licking branch, and haven't really used the water hole yet because it hasn't been just putting it in this season. So excited to see how that does. But mock scrapes and water holes really good to define deer movement. And then number 5 is probably the biggest one. It is tree stands and access. If you're not accessing your stands right, if you're not hunting your stands right, I mean, I know the majority of hunters, 90% of hunters, are not hunting the way they should and are spooking deer off every single time they go in the woods. And that's just horrible. That's going to make your deer property nocturnal. That's going to make you not have a good hunt at all. Maybe during the rut. I mean, a lot of those rules change during the rut because deer are just absolutely everywhere. But especially during October and December, where December is the most crucial month, December through January, when you're hunting, is one of the most crucial months for a deer's life, because that's when they need that food and that's when they need that bedding area the most. So making sure your tree stands are in the right spots. I don't want to have to go through the middle of a food plot to get to my stand. And so that's what's kind of bad about fields. You have to go through fields to get to stands. And there's an exception for that, because, I mean, here, if I couldn't go through a field in the morning, I wouldn't be able to access probably 95% of my property if I could not go through a field during the morning. I couldn't hunt 95% of my property because I couldn't get to it without going through a field. So making sure you're knowing exactly where the deer are going, making sure that you're on a spook-free route to your tree stand or blind is critical for when you're hunting. And not spooking deer by driving ATVs in there or anything. Making sure trail cameras are right next to your stands. That way you don't have to go walk through where you think a deer will be. Like if you have a run and you have to go to the other side, you got to cross the run to get to it, and you're expecting a deer to be there when you're hunting, then that's not good, because you're going to spook that deer off. It could even smell you as well. And scent, sight, and sound. If all of those things are on your property and you're making them see you, hear you, and smell you, then you're going to have a horrible property, and you're going to have a nocturnal property. So to create a daylight movement, you have to do all those things right. You have to put tree stands in the right spots. You got to put your access routes in the right spots. You got to put your bedding areas, your mock scrapes, your water holes, your food plots, all in the right spots. So I hope this helps. And if you ever need to create a daylight movement property, if you have a lot of nocturnal, just deer herd in general this last season that you had, all you have to do is put in even a tiny little micro food plot. That will help a lot. And then putting in a good tree stand with a good access route where you're not spooking deer when you're coming in, that will totally change how you hunt, and it will totally change how the deer react to you and to your land if you're hunting these right ways. If your tree stands are unpressured, your food plots are unpressured, and you're hunting them the right ways with the right access and the right even gear, making sure that your gear is not loud and you're not loud at all. And so that will equal to a good daylight movement property. So I hope this helps you. And if you need to do it fast, if you want to have a good season this season and you don't think you have enough time, there's still time to do it. Just make sure you put those tree stands in the right spots is number one priority, and your access routes. But if you want to just upgrade it even a little bit more, try putting in a food plot for the first time and just see how that goes. Food plots are the number one attraction. If you have if you're not getting a lot of deer on your property and you put a nice food plot in, it doesn't have to be anything big. It doesn't have to be an acre of a food plot. It doesn't even have to be a quarter-acre food plot like I have. You can have an 1/8 acre of a food plot. I have a micro food plot that's probably, say, 12 feet by 12 feet, and it worked great, and I shot 2 bucks out of it. So, and not necessarily that you should do that, but putting in food plots in general is a really good thing to make sure that you have a good daylight movement property, and that you're not spooking the deer out of that food plot or out of your property in general. So again, hope that helps you, and I hope that you have a great hunt this season applying these 5 tips and just making sure you have a good daylight movement property in general.